Hello and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm reviewing a book that I read on Kindle, so I only have a Kindle with its cover on to use as my prop instead of the book itself and the cover. So you'll have to watch me refer to this instead of the book, but I hope you'll understand. The book is titled The Lies She Sold, and it's by an author named Kyla Sharp. Now, I happen to know Kyla in real life. We've met through a business, you could say networking association group. And I knew that she was an author and I knew she'd been working on some different things, but we have a friendship that isn't tied to the books. And so when I found out that this book she'd been working on was written, I really did want to read it. Now, the perils of reading the book of someone you know, or particularly someone, let's say, you like and you have a friendship with, is can you tell them if it's no good? And I'd only had one previous experience with this, with someone who I didn't know as well as Kyla, just someone who was floating around in Paris doing some networking at the time. And he had a book that he was promoting, and I said, I read a lot of books. I'm happy to give it a read and give you some feedback. And I only made it about a quarter of the way through before I had to stop. It was dreadful. It was really, really bad. And a commitment I'm willing to make to authors insofar as I know it's hard to get out there as an independent author is if I don't like a book, I won't finish it and I won't review it. You know, it's one thing to not like a book. It's another to go on the record and say how much you don't like it. And by not finishing, I was also able to truthfully say, like, you know, maybe it does get better, but it's not good enough for me to keep reading. And that's a standard I'm happy to apply across all different kinds of books. So I probably spent a page, and remember, he had said that he was open to hearing feedback. And so I wrote out maybe about a page and a half of feedback, everything from a mistake, like he said that one of the characters had a very British accent. But as anyone knows, there is no such thing as a very British accent. I mean, that's something that an American who's never traveled anywhere might say because we identify a generic British accent. But for someone writing a book who's trying to give you a sense of what the character sounds like, a very British accent is literally meaningless. You could be referring to someone who has an accent from the Midlands, someone who has a North London accent as opposed to maybe a West London accent. But the point is, a very British accent meant nothing. And I just pointed out, I said this might need some tightening up. But then I pointed out that the character wasn't really interesting. I wasn't really being compelled to get into the action part of the story. And to his credit, he did respond back and say, well, I think you should keep reading. But to his discredit, he didn't address any of the points that I mentioned. So it was with some trepidation that I picked up this book, in part because I did have a friendship here, a pre-existing friendship. And I didn't know how I would be able to respond if the book wasn't any good. Thankfully, and the reason why I'm recording this video, the book was good. And that's why I feel comfortable recommending it, not just telling her that I thought it was good. And in part, I will say this is due to the fact that The Lies She Sold has to do with an MLM, a multi-level marketing company. And in fact, the fictional MLM for this thriller is called She-Aura, but it's very closely related. It has aspects of all MLMs in it, but it's most closely related to LuLaRoe, which trapped one of my sisters and her husband for 2.5 years. And the reason perhaps I was so vehement in my opposition to my sister's involvement was not so much that I knew about women's leggings, which is the main product that LuLaRoe hawks, or still hawks. I don't know if it's still around. Maybe it is. But once upon a time in my early 20s, a long time ago, I was in Amway. So and I had experienced actually enough success in my early 20s that I went to go meet some of the big uplines. I went to their homes, which were ridiculous. And I found out that most of the money they make is actually from the system, the motivational system of products, tapes, books. and there's some money that they make from selling the products. But the problem with MLMs in general, not just Amway, is that the products are simply average market quality. They'll be told, they're pitched to you, they're positioned to you as being of the best or really competitive, but the reality is they're quite average. Another example would be, let's say, Mary Kay or Arbonne for women. Those brands will tell you that they're top quality, but I tell you, living in France, I know what top quality cosmetics go for just because you hear women talk about it, or you might see it if you're in a shop, and they're very expensive. And the idea that something I'm going to buy from my neighbor in a living room sale is of the same quality and should be anywhere near the same price is laughable. But that is what multi-level marketing is. And I would say many decades on, or even just a couple decades on, in my case, I tend to say I would pay someone, if they're a friend or a relative of mine, I would pay them to not participate in the MLM. And I have a zero tolerance policy in terms of supporting. I won't give them any kind of support. I won't buy a product. I won't sign up on a website, because that gives them false hope. It gives them the impression that their business is working, so-called business, or business opportunity, which is how it's normally pitched. And having run several businesses myself, successfully sold one, I know what businesses are, and this is not a business. This is just false hope and in some ways a soft cult. That's why perhaps I was so fascinated by the book, because it manages to take these non-fictional realities. So clearly Kyla, and I haven't really talked to her about her creative process for this book, I'm a little curious to find out. She must have read article after article after article, watched YouTube video after YouTube video after YouTube video to get a really broad understanding of what multi-level marketing companies are in general, and then let's say LuLaRoe specifically, because as I say, it's the strongest inspiration for this She-Aura company. This She-Aura sells headbands that are scented, which I think the fact that she was able to create a fake MLM is part of the genius of the book as well. So she takes the non-fictional foundation and she layers on this thriller murder mystery, which I am not saying that people who participate in MLMs are murderers. Not at all. I'm just saying that this is a classic example of world building applied to something not as momentous. When people talk about world building these days, they refer to the television adaptation of Man in the High Castle, which was exceptionally well done, or the Expanse series. Both of those live on Amazon. More recently in pop culture, people will talk about Game of Thrones. And obviously, yes, those are all world-building exercises, but they span many, many books or many, many television series. But in a certain sense, the world-building is done for you if you don't know anything about an MLM. You're not hampered in reading the book, because I think Kyla does a fairly good job of orienting you into what the opportunity looks like. Obviously, she could go deeper and get more detailed, but then it wouldn't be a shorter, tight novel, which is what she's going for, and a thriller. Obviously, she's focusing on the actions of the characters rather than trying to paint a really clear picture of an MLM. And I think that's really relevant. You get just enough. World building is like dreaming. You have enough for you to live in the universe, but not enough for you to do a research paper on an aspect of the universe. You'd have to do that yourself. And I think I was at an advantage coming into the book, not only having experienced MLM myself, but having tried to get my sister out. And thankfully, she got out in her own good time after 2.5 years. No murders were committed, thankfully. But while I'd like to say that it was due to interventions from myself and my siblings, I think realistically everyone's got to figure out when it makes sense for them to leave. And you see that in some of the character arcs in this novel. But as I say, those of you who don't have any MLM background can still come in and I think really enjoy the book, because Kyla does a fair amount of world building from this non-fictional reality that is multi-level marketing books. Multi-level marketing companies, applying them to this book. So it's definitely not sort of psychological murder thriller. I would not relate it around MLMs. I mean, this is an invented genre. I don't know if there's any other MLM murder mysteries. Kyla may have created an entire category for herself and may go on to create, many more versions of this. But I really appreciated it because when I do light reading, it tends to be spy novels. I tend to stick with a particular type of genre that for me is just relaxing reading. I'm not needing to have to pay as much attention to that text. And so this fit well into that. You could say a beach read, something fun, and in a sense, something I might pass on. It's not too soon. I think it's been a couple years now for that sister. I may get her a copy just so that she might have a few laughs, and we can talk about how Kyla managed to weave in the nonfiction with the fiction and create this really plausible reality. I'm not saying the murder part of it was plausible, but although I suppose it could be in some ways. But it's a good read and a fun way to look at MLM differently from a very serious YouTube video or a very angry article. And that's why I think you should pick up a copy or send a copy, buy a copy, send it to a friend of The Lies She Sold by Kyla Sharp. If you enjoyed this review, feel free to take a look at my other videos on the channel, or feel free to navigate over to my Patreon and see other book reviews that I've done, which I am continuing to try to do on a regular basis whenever I can.